So y'all remember Fairytale, right? Not that I'd be amazed since it's still one of the biggest anime out there, and back then was pretty close to the big three popularity wise. Now me personally, I have an interesting history with Fairytale. Back when I was first getting into anime around 2015 and 2016, aside from Dragon Ball, Fairytale and Naruto were my first long run of shonen anime, and at the time it was probably one of my favorite shows, even though I watched like most of it on poor quality YouTube videos, and the backgrounds were always bigger than the episodes themselves. I'm sure at least some of y'all can relate to that. Now fast forward, my current thoughts on the anime as a whole are, well, I'll get to that later. But really looking back at Fairytale, I honestly can't help but get a feeling of nostalgia. Thinking about the characters, the story, and a bunch of other things from the series always brings me back. Now for anyone watching that doesn't know what Fairytale is, it started off as a manga in 2006 created by Hiro Mashima. It was made other series you may or may not be familiar with, like Rave Master or his newer series Eden Zero. Back to Fairytale though, it would eventually get an anime adaptation that would go on for over 300 episodes. I guess I should also mention that the series will get a spin-off called the 100-Year Quest, though I won't be discussing it in this video because one, I haven't watched it yet, but two, it's still pretty new, and in this video I want to mainly focus on what makes me nostalgic about Fairytale, though maybe if I ever get around to it, I might talk about it on my second channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, by the way. Anyways though, the main plot of Fairytale revolves around a wizard guild of the same name, which is located in the land of Fior. Now magic is a huge practice in the series, and mages can join a guild and go on different missions, and the main characters of the series within the guild are Natsu, Happy, Lucy, Gray, and Urza. Natsu is a fire mage as well as one of the several dragon slayers in the series, which I'll touch more on dragon slayers throughout the video. Happy is Natsu's weird flying pet cat thing. Okay, it's actually more complicated than that. Happy is what's called an Exi, which are these talking cat creatures with wings. A few of the dragon slayers have one, and we get introduced to more as the series continues. You got Lucy, who's technically the series main character, though Natsu basically gets the same amount of focus as her, so I'd really like to consider them both as the main protagonists. She joined the guild after running away from home, and after joining she grows closer to the members. Gray is Natsu's rival, and he also has one of the coldest names in the series, no pun intended, being Gray Fullbuster. He also loves to strip. That's all you need to know. And last but not least, you have Urza, who's basically the powerhouse of the group. She's also one of the 5 S-rank mages in the guild. This is due to the type of magic she uses and just how well she uses it, which I guess now I should talk about each of the main characters' abilities. Like I mentioned earlier, Natsu uses Dragon Slayer magic, specifically fire dragon magic. So not only does this give him strong fire abilities, but he's immune to pretty much any type of fire. So if he gets hit by basically anything fire related, he can just eat that shit up. No, like literally this dude can actually consume fire. And it's the same thing for every other dragon slayer. They're also trained by actual dragons. In Natsu's case, he was trained by the dragon Igneal, and a lot of Natsu's attacks are closely related to him. For Lucy, she uses what's called celestial spirit magic. This allows her to choose from a variety of different celestial spirits to summon, each of which revolving around different constellations. Gray's abilities are pretty simple. He basically just uses ice magic, though a lot later on into the series, he gains what's known as devil slayer magic, which has very similar functions to dragon slayer magic, but instead of dragons, it revolves around demons. And then you have Urza, who uses requip magic. This basically allows her to switch her gear whenever she wants to, giving her over 100 sets of armor and weapons to switch to at will. And not gonna lie, looking back, this shit was low-key broken. It's somewhat reminiscent of Gilgamesh's ability from the Fate series, though a lot more limited. Now moving on, there are a few more characters that join the main group, though I'll talk more about them when I go through some of the arcs. There are also other members of the guild like Kana, Levi, Elfman, and Mira Jane, and of course the guild leader Makarov. One thing I think this series does really well is making the Fairytale Guild feel like one big family, and everyone who joins feel like new additions to said family, which works well with the show's core theme being friendship. And this leads me to my next point. Fairytale used to get a lot of hate, especially for its heavy emphasis on the power of friendship. Personally, I'm kind of split on this. On one hand, I mean, it is the core theme of the series, so it's expected to be frequently shown to us, but on the other hand, the show does sometimes use it in places where it isn't fully necessary. Another huge complaint that people had with it was its similarities to One Piece, which I'll be completely honest, there definitely are some, even with character designs. Like, you can't tell me Gildarts and Shanks aren't twins. Or shall I say triplets. But at the end of the day, if you've seen both One Piece and Fairytale, you know they are two completely different series. Moving on though, another thing I think this anime does well is making its world feel active. You got all the different guilds we meet and reoccurring characters, along with some pretty decent world building. There's always a whole bunch of things as well as character perspectives going on in each arc. Speaking of arcs though,
hey guys, Ready for some more fairy tale?
Fairy Tail story is pretty interesting. It has some bumps and bruises and can definitely be inconsistent with its writing sometimes, but it also has some very good, dare I even say great moments in its story that really help make the series what it is, and also intensifies my nostalgia when revisiting. The earlier arcs in the show when looking back were actually not that bad. I'm mainly talking about everything up to the Battle for Fairy Tail arc. These arcs basically get us familiar with the main characters, some of their backstories, and a taste of what the rest of the series will be like. We also get introduced to some new important cast members, like Gajil, who is the second Dragon Slayer we meet, Juvia, Gray's love interest, and Loxus, who is Makaral's grandson and also our third Dragon Slayer. Now, unlike Natsu and Gajil, he got his powers from an item called a lacrima. Like I said, these arcs weren't that bad and honestly were pretty solid, with my favorite one probably being the Tower of Heaven. In this arc, Urza's childhood friends kidnap her so they could sacrifice her and bring back this mage named Zeref. Keep his name in mind, by the way, because this won't be the last time I talk about him. We get a lot of Urza's backstory this arc, along with her relationship to the one who came up with this plan, Jalal. This arc contains some pretty emotional moments and solid fights, with Urza versus the pink-haired lady, I really don't remember her name, and Natsu versus Jalal being some of the highlights. I've also got to say the opening for this arc is a classic and always gets me hyped. This, along with the first opening, get me so nostalgic and are definitely some of the best in the show. After these first few arcs, we get the Oracion, Seis, and the Edolas arcs. The Oracion Seis arc features the guild fighting against another guild of the same name. This arc overall was okay. I never really cared about the Oracion Seis as characters, and the fights were alright, but I gotta say Fiesta is a hard-ass opening. I feel like it perfectly captures the essence of Fairy Tail. More importantly though, this arc introduces us to Wendy, our fourth Dragon Slayer. She uses wind magic and also has her own Exi named Carla. Now right after this arc, we meet the final S-rank mage of the guild, Guildarts. Before him though, there was another S-rank mage we met named Mistigan, though in the arc after the Tower of Heaven, he was revealed to be Jalal. He's not the same Jalal though, I'll explain that in a second. But yeah, Guildarts is a pretty cool character, and he's definitely the strongest one introduced up to this point. Moving on to Edolas though, this arc mainly focuses on the Exceeds, as well as the mystery behind who Mistigan is. Basically, Edolas is a sort of alternate world to the main one, and we see different versions of the characters in there. And here it gets revealed that Mistigan is this world's version of Jalal. Also, the Exceeds are the only ones who can use magic here. We learn more about Carla this arc and even get some decent growth from Happy of all characters. This isn't a complaint, by the way, he's just been comedic relief up to this point. This arc has some pretty emotional moments and overall wasn't bad, but the next arc, Tenrou Island, in my opinion, is one of the best in the series. Tenrou Island is the place where the first guildmaster Mavis is buried at. Some of the members from Fairy Tail go over there to try and find her grave. However, at the same time, another guild named Grimoire Hearts, which is ran by one of the former Fairy Tail masters named Hades, is currently on the island, as well as the main antagonist of the series, Zeref, with this being our first real introduction to him. Now, he doesn't really do much until the end, but this arc sort of foreshadows a relationship between him and Natsu. Anyways though, some of my favorite moments from this arc are from the fights. You got Urza versus Azuma, Guildarts versus Blue Note, Natsu versus this guy named Zancro, who's what's known as a God Slayer, and of course, everyone versus Hades. At the end of the arc, the first Dragon Slayer named Agnologia appears and attacks the guild. However, the guild is unable to defeat him, even creating this thing called the Fairy Sphere as a last resort. Unfortunately, it fails and it results in the guild going missing for 7 whole years. But they aren't dead though, because during this fight, Mavis comes back to protect them. But within that time, the guild's reputation drops and they aren't what they used to be. Honestly, I'm kind of mixed with the whole time skip thing. I could understand maybe like a year or two, but 7 is a bit much. The power scaling was also a little bit off, but this does serve as a motivation for the characters in the next arc, the Grand Magic Games. This right here is the show's tournament arc. The Grand Magic Games is basically Fairy Tail's last chance to boost their reputation back up, and we get a lot of great moments from this arc. We meet 2 new Dragon Slayers from a rival guild named Sting and Rogue, and they have a really good fight against Natsu. You also got Urza beating 100 beasts on her own, which was just straight badassery. There were a few other fights that I did enjoy, but the second half of this arc is where things get kind of weird. You got the infamous and controversial scene where Sting forfeits against Fairy Tail, giving them the win. Then you have the whole Eclipse and Future Rogue stuff, which I can't lie, I wasn't really a big fan of. But it did expand the world a bit with us learning more about the King of Fiore. Oh, and of course we get the opening Strike Back, which used to be my favorite opening from this anime and is still one of my favorites. After this, we get, in my opinion, the best arc of the series, Tartaros. The Fairy Tail Guild goes up against the strongest Dark Guild named Tartaros. Just like the Grand Magic Games, this arc has everyone getting a bit of action. Even Wendy, who hardly gets any, gets a major fight this arc. This arc also gives us some huge reveals. This is where we find out that Gray is a Devil Slayer, and we also find out that Zeref is actually Natsu's brother. And all of the Dragon Slayers, excluding the ones who use lacrimas, are from 400 years in the past. And by the end of this arc, the entire guild disbands. Just a whole lot of things to take in. And not to mention, this is where the show had ended for like a few years. Obviously, the manga was still ongoing, and eventually we would get the final season. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is kind of where I stopped watching Fairy Tail. I remember when this season came out and I did watch most of it, but by this point, I wasn't as into Fairy Tail as I used to be. I remember this is when the guild got back together and Gray was like evil or some shit, but that's really about it. The Alvarez arc, on the other hand, I do remember a lot more. You had the Spring and 12 fights, which were pretty cool. This was also the arc where we finally got to fight Zeref. We also get a lot more lore about the Fairy Tail guild, but that's really all I remember. I didn't even watch the Agnologia stuff at the end, which I know was pretty controversial at the time. And as for the filler arcs, they were weak as hell, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, that's basically it when it comes to my knowledge of Fairy Tail. Obviously, I didn't go into like every detail about the series, mainly due to time constraints. If I really had to give an overall rating for the series, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. It's an alright anime. The best way I could describe it is peak mid, which sounds kind of crazy, and I don't think it's mid necessarily, but it's definitely on that verge. It has a few things that I really do like, some of which I mentioned earlier, but there's definitely a few flaws, like its execution of the friendship theme, or the ridiculous and abundant fake out deaths, which it somehow does in an even more offensive way than One Piece. I didn't even think that was possible. With all of this considered though, Fairy Tail is an anime that I still have a lot of nostalgia for, since like I said, it was one of the first shows to really get me into anime. And even though it's definitely not one of my favorites anymore, it's a series that I don't think I could ever fully turn my back on. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. If you made it this far, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.